Hello, and welcome to our podcast. My name is Gwen, and these are my co-hosts. You may introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. Wren, hello, and...
Hi, I'm Ivy.
And so today we are going to be talking about some movies. First things first, though. In some recent movie news, that I wanted to discuss with you. Actually, first, how are you guys feeling? How has your days been so far?
Now that I'm on air, I'm a fair bit shy, but I'm fairly annoyed because the delivery I was waiting on has been delayed again, which is great. I'll be waiting like another week for the big order I paid for, which is just fantastic. Just off to an incredible start this week.
Incredible.
I'm having a fairly chill day. I don't really have much to say about it, actually, to be honest.
Fair enough. We can jump right into it.
Let's jump right into it.
So, I wanted to bring up some recent film news, fairly recent at the time of recording. So, in a recent interview with Millie Bobby Brown of Stranger Things fame, she said recently that she doesn't watch her own movies or movies in general, owing in part to, and this is her saying this, not me, her short attention span. So, I wanted to sort of pose it to you guys. Do you think that it is important that, like, actors or actresses, like, watch a lot of movies in order to be in movies? Like, do you think that's an important part of being an actor, or do you think that's, like, not necessary? Because I've seen a lot of people weighing in on that.
I feel like I'd need to be an actor to fully know. I can get not wanting to watch a lot of movies, especially movies that you yourself are in.
Yeah.
Like, I wouldn't do that myself. And I guess it can be valuable to learn from other people, learn how to act in various different ways. Maybe you're watching, I don't know, Vertigo from 19 whatever, and you're like, yeah, sure, I want to take from this, but at the same time, I don't think they have to. I mean, if they're in the industry, there's probably a reason they're in the industry, and if they keep doing what they're doing, they should be fine. I don't think they should be under any massive pressure to advance their craft.
On that point, unfortunately, a lot of the reason for a lot of actors to be in the industry tends to be nepotism these days, so...
That's true.
I mean, I'm gonna be real, I don't think any of the Buseys can act, but here we are, there's 7 of them.
I think that, it's interesting because, like, I feel like a part of, like, there's been a lot of negative response to this statement in particular from Millie Bobby Brown, and a part of me does feel like that partly comes down to some, I don't know, like, to summarize, I feel like Adam Driver, I think, made a statement like this a while back where he said that he didn't watch a lot of movies, and specifically movies that he was in, and, like, I don't think I saw nearly this level of backlash that Millie Bobby Brown is facing. And I don't know whether that's just, like, a sexism thing.
I mean, there's definitely an element of sexism in there, because it's the internet, unfortunately, and people are like that. But also, like, when he said it, I disagreed with him then, too.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, to me, personally, if you're in that position, if you're in that job role, like, it's more than a job. You're an entertainer.
Yeah.
And if you care about your craft, you should want to improve it. Saying you don't really watch other movies or, like, engage with it at that level implies to me that either they aren't interested in improving, they think they're kind of good where they're at, or they just see it as a job and not as a craft, which is fair. It's definitely fair to see your job as a job.
Yeah.
But I don't know, in an entertainment medium, I feel like if you're not trying to improve of what you're doing, then why are you doing it?
I guess there is an aspect of it. I also think that, like, you know, there's more to acting than just movies. There's also, like, you know, plays and audio dramas and all kinds of fields in which acting is necessary. So if you don't like watching movies, then I don't necessarily, like, if back in the day when theatre was the only sort of available means of acting, you couldn't watch back your own performances. So I guess there's a way of, like, you know, there's more to acting than that. It's also like being able to collaborate with the director. There's being able to sort of like work to the camera itself. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot to it, but I see where you're coming from in terms of like it maybe shows a interest in a certain side of the industry while sort of neglecting maybe another side of it.
It feels very inherent that the two go hand in hand. I feel like a lot of the actors I particularly love, or I feel like tend to give an astounding performance, tend to go above and beyond in their performance, are actors that are self-proclaimed cinephiles or people who talk about and have a love for cinema a lot.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Draw your own conclusion from there, I guess. But that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I guess it's just kind of easier to throw stones at Millie Bobby Brown compared to Adam Driver, because Adam Driver does kind of go crazy in some of his performances, and maybe I just don't know Millie Bobby Brown's career, but I don't know what she does. I don't know what she does.
I have liked Millie Bobby Brown in some things. I've liked Adam Driver in a lot of things. I'm not.
What is Millie Bobby Brown in?
I'm not necessarily thinking that.
She's in Stranger Things. She's 11 in that, right?
Yeah, 11 in Stranger Things, and she's in the Enola Holmes movies.
She was also in Godzilla vs Kong.
Yes,
it was versus Kong, wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, it was
King of
versus Kong, and also King of the Monsters.
Was she in King of the Monsters as well?
Yes. I believe so.
Oh yeah, because the stadium scene. Yes. Yeah, I've completely forgot.
I think that at the end of the day, I think it just comes down to... Not
exactly a franchise for human actors to excel at.
No, probably not. But at the end of the day, I think it's just a matter of like different approaches to sort of what is at the end of the day a job, and whether people sort of seek to further an artistic craft in that job, or whether they just simply seek to, do a good enough job to, keep the lights on, then, that's up to them.
Not to go, like, completely off track, but now I'm thinking about being an actor in one of those Monsterverse films, and I'd love to see some interviews, I should probably look into them, with the actors on those movies, because the kind of consensus that you see online and with critics and everything is... Whenever there's scenes, people are like, shut up, show me the dinosaur, show me the monkey, shut up, move it along.
Yeah.
And I just wonder how people feel working on those movies.
It's a weird one, because there are certain human actors in those movies that, like, give a good enough performance or have a good enough stage presence that people remember them. Yeah. Like, I forget the actor's name, but the one actor who dies with Godzilla in King of the Monsters.
Oh yeah, I was thinking the exact same guy.
Watanabe.
Really good.
Yeah. His performance throughout the entire movie is phenomenal.
Yeah,
and it's definitely one you take away from.
And there's Bryan Cranston in the 2014 Godzilla.
Bryan Cranston's good, yeah.
Bryan Cranston's in Godzilla? What?
Yeah, he's in the 2014
That's the reason
one.
I originally saw the first Godzilla when I was younger.
He was in the 2014 Godzilla for the first half of the movie, and then he dies, and then it's really disappointing because he is the best actor in that movie, and then he just disappears for the remaining half of the film.
I haven't seen the 2014 one. Does Godzilla do funny, like, CGI drop kicks, or is it a bit more subdued?
It's a bit more subdued. It feels like a middle ground between, like, the more, like...
Monsterverse movies, when they come back, tend to be like serious, and as we go along, they get more and more comedic. Until we're at the buddy cop point we're at now.
I think that the Godzilla 2014 is like a good middle ground between like the absurdism of the Monsterverse movies we're getting now, and the kind of more grounded nature of something like -1. It's kind of somewhere between those. Not quite one, not quite the other.
Can we talk about Godzilla x Kong for a second? I think that's the name of the movie.
Sure.
You know the GIF where Kong, I think it's Kong, it's one of the gorillas, picks up like a baby monkey and starts swinging it around with a weapon.
Yeah, I've seen the GIF.
I have seen the GIF.
God.
I'm watching that on Friday, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Shall we talk about Crank?
Are we cranking now? Okay.
Are we cranking?
We're cranking. We're cranking. So, to introduce it, Crank is a 2006 action movie directed by Brian Taylor and Mark Neveldine, about Chev Chelios, who's played by Jason Statham, a professional assassin who wakes up one day to find that he's been injected with, and I'm quoting the movie directly here, a Beijing cocktail of dangerous drugs.
They gave him that Chinese shit.
Yes. And he finds out that unless he keeps his adrenaline up, the poison will slowly kill him. So the only thing that is keeping the poison from killing him outright is the fact that he is keeping his adrenaline up. And then we have an action movie. So, just initial thoughts. What did you guys think of Crank?
Okay, what order are we going in, first of all? Who's talking first?
Ren, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, sure, I'll talk about Crank. So I think I liked it the most. I don't know if we're going to give scores, but I gave it 9 out of 10. Which, very unexpected of me, I feel, because most of the movies I like are movies that make you think and make you sad. But this one, I don't know, really liked it. I don't know how to describe it, it was like coked up for the whole film.
Yeah.
They gave the editor and the cameraman that shit. They gave them the same shit that he was huffing for the whole movie.
They really were just having fun with it.
Yeah.
They had so much fun with it. And it's really edgy. And I feel I might as well just address this, first of all. This movie is really, really offensive. It's very 2006.
Yes.
2006, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very 2006. And it has that kind of mid-2000s weirdly nihilistic approach to viewing people and culture.
It is a very chauvinistic and misogynistic
Massively.
and offensive film in many different ways.
This is a Jason Statham movie.
Yes.
This is the only Jason Statham movie I have ever seen.
I have seen a couple, and honestly, I have not boarded the Jason Statham train until this, I would say. And
his earlier work, as a person who is familiar with it thanks to Film 4 reruns, his earlier work is something.
I think while this film is deeply offensive and edgy and misogynistic and chauvinistic, I would be lying if I said this film did not make me laugh harder than any film has in a while. And I think...
Oh, yeah, it's hilarious.
I think a lot of that comes down to... It's so deeply absurd in its presentation that it can be hard to actually find it offensive. It's funny because one of the actors from Always Sunny is in it, Glenn Howerton, shows up in a brief cameo. But... it kind of did remind me of the kind of energy that an Always Sunny episode has, in that it is deeply offensive, but also it's so bizarre in how it presents its offensiveness that it doesn't feel as mean-spirited as some other sort of films that portray this kind of thing.
It definitely isn't mean-spirited. If I want to just zoom in on what you brought up with Always Sunny, I think they're similar in the same way, where they portray these things, but they're weirdly self-aware about it. And it seems to be, like, highlighting the fucked up parts of humanity, really, showing the worst of humanity. I think the scene that really struck out to me was when he threw the taxi driver to the ground, and when Al-Qaeda, and then all those people start swarming him, like, I love Bush, I voted for Bush, I love Bush.
Yeah, that was peak. That is peak Americanism.
That...
I love
actually feels like a certain level of, like, while it is very dark and while it is kind of grim, there is a level of self-awareness and social commentary there that actually makes it a bit more tolerable. Like, none of the characters are good people. All of them are pieces of shit. But, like...
the movie really is in the heart of LA.
Yeah. I mean, it clearly took a lot of inspiration from GTA and things like that. And sort of various...
I'm not sure if it did. I mean, how old was GTA at this point?
San Andreas was out at this point.
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. That makes sense.
Yeah.
San Andreas, Vice City, like...
yeah.
We had the big hitters.
What else is there to say with Crank?
It is very much a video game movie. Like, that's where its loyalties lie, I feel. There's so many scenes that just make you think this is a CG cutscene, but filmed.
Yeah. I mean...
Yeah.
I think also one thing that I find strangely bizarre about this film is the moments where it does slow down and does become introspective. Like,
they're really strange.
They are incredibly strange. Like, the entire movie is at an incredibly breakneck pace. Like, you're going from a gunfight in a bar to driving a car through a mall to, you know, fucking chasing away from cops and all that kind of stuff. And then you'll just have the first scene that I noticed it was the scene in the hospital, where he just walks into a room and he finds a dying man in a hospital bed. And the film stops dead in its tracks to sort of...
It takes the time to ponder why he wants to live.
Yes. It's like he sits just staring at this old man, contemplating, like, you know, the nature of his mortality. And it's very bizarre in that way. There's also the scene in the elevator in which he is confronted by the ghosts of his family, people he's killed.
Oh god, I completely forgot about that section until the guy gets like superimposed over the top by ghosts that he believes he's talking to.
Yeah.
And it keeps cutting back and forth between different faces.
It's weirdly introspective, which for a movie that is as breakneck as this, I wouldn't have expected it to allow space for that.
I like it though, because it feels like, you know, when you're in a car and you emergency stop the car and you get that kind of whiplash.
Yeah.
It has that kind of effect, and I think the pacing kind of works to these moments' benefit.
Yeah. In general, it is a very strange kind of mixture of these different things, because, like, I mean, the general... I wouldn't say that the film is exactly, like, commenting on much. It's not, like, you know, incredibly deep in its themes. But, like, if there is a theme to be taken away from it, I would say that, like... I mean, he says it at the end. Like, the idea of, like, stopping to smell the roses once in a while. It's, like... I guess it comes down to the idea that, you know, you only start living when you are sort of aware of the fact that you can die. Like, he is brought into this awareness of his death, and sort of it is very much put in his face, and so because of that, he starts living with a kind of reckless abandon that actually sort of improves his life in a strange way.
It's really interesting to see you put an analytical spin on crime.
I'm trying.
It really is.
I'm trying. There is just the presentational, and the humor of it is just really funny, I think. Like,
it is really funny. I'm not sure if it's because I'm mind poisoned or not, though. Like, when he was driving through the mall, he pulled a coconut mall, really. Just speeding on through there. Oh my word.
I think it's also, like, the directors, Brian Taylor and Mark Neville-Dean, they do clearly have a very distinct style. Like, from this, Ghost Rider to Mum and Dad, from what little I've seen of it, they clearly, like... Yes, this wasn't...
Gamer.
What interests me is that this isn't, like... This film feels very 2000s, but it also feels like that... Like, I could tell a film that is made by these two.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it definitely gave off Ghost Rider vibes. As a person who quite likes the Ghost Rider sequel, don't let that destroy your opinions of me. But,
I mean...
it definitely does give off that vibe.
Yeah.
So we're already singing our praises for Crank, of all things. This is how we're starting off.
You can't tell me that was a bad movie. Like, there's a reason people keep recommending it.
It wasn't. It was very fun. I think it is... fascinating to me, though, how a film that is this relentless doesn't get... Well, I felt exhausted by the end of this movie. Like literally, I had a nap after we finished watching it. Like, I was just like, that's too much. I need to rest.
That's it. I'm going to bed.
Like, I'm honestly surprised, because, like, I think movies that tend to have this much of a breakneck pace, like, a lot of them don't tend to work as well as this does. I think it perhaps is a testament to, as wild as the editing gets, and to anybody who's listening who hasn't watched it, the editing is incredibly sporadic and bizarre, filled with like freeze frames and like cross-cutting and overlaying footage on top of each other.
Multiple shots of a zoomed-in CG heart.
Yeah, it will like zoom in on his chest and it will like show a CG of his heart beating, and then at one point it just randomly does that to a pigeon.
Can we talk about the birds in this movie in general? Like that scene where he fires the gun and it cuts to a random bird and the bird just dies.
You see, that is like as much as we shit on the editing for like being as sporadic
I'm
as
not
it
shitting
is,
on the medic.
like
I don't know if I'd call it shitting on it. If anything, I think it's like it's breakneck and it wouldn't work in like most other movies, but for this it's a perfect thing to do. Like it works to the premise's benefit.
if this style of editing was in any other movie, I would call it shit, but it works in Crank because it makes you feel like you are on drugs.
I just love when it really ups like the graininess and the saturation. I think we should do that more.
For like flashback scenes.
Yeah, it looks like a 2013 Facebook post, like half of the time.
It feels very Guy Ritchie in that sense.
It feels like something your grandmother would post on Facebook.
Yeah. In terms of the editing, I would say weirdly, which feels weird, it feels strange to say about this movie of all things, but I would say that it is well edited, and not only is it well edited, but it's also like well paced. Like the scene to scene editing is also good in terms of like keeping up the relentlessness of it, but also like in terms of its overall structure, like it is very well paced. Like I feel like for a premise like this, you need to. It certainly
does like what it sets out to do.
Yeah.
It gets in and gets out. It doesn't overstay its welcome.
It's I think like it's 87 minutes. I think in terms of its runtime,
and that is perfect.
Yeah, you couldn't have a movie like this and have it be like 2 hours long.
I feel like it really shows what you can do.
Yeah.
In an hour and a half as well.
Yeah.
Because I feel like we're so accustomed nowadays to like, yeah, I'm gonna go sit in the cinema, watch a super long movie, and I'm fine with that when a movie justifies its length, like Killers of the Flower Moon, Oppenheimer last year. Both of those really justified it. Yeah. But there are some movies I've watched where it's like 3 hours long, and I'm sat there and I'm like, did this scene need to be here? What's happening?
Time to be the stinker about Dune 2.
I don't think there is I don't think there is a single scene in Crank where I was like, this doesn't need to be here. Like, it was, and even if there was, it moves on so quickly that I don't really care. Like, any time there was like a bit that wasn't interesting me, chances are it would move on 20 seconds to something that did.
Yeah, there is literally one scene I can think of where I'm like, was this completely necessary? Did this need to be here? And that is probably, you know, the one scene with the mobster boss where it just stays on him focused for an elaborate amount of time for like a minute.
Yeah, I can remember that.
That one's a little long. I understand why it exists. It's meant to be like a cooldown moment because they didn't have a scene to intersperse between the two action points.
Yeah.
But it's a little too long.
Yeah.
That's it. That's my only complaint about the pacing.
There's also just like a series of things in this movie that for the life of me, like there are a lot of movies where like after I watch them, I like can imagine myself being like, I want to speak to the director. Like I want to ask them what this was specifically and why this was included. One of those is there's a scene late in the film where Jason Statham is about to confront the villains, and he stops briefly in a bathroom, a public bathroom, and there is just a projection on the wall of the bathroom of two turtles having sex. And
I didn't even notice that.
We did bring it up. It was mentioned.
For the life of me, I do not understand why that was there. There's several just incomprehensible things in this film. Like there's that.
It probably means something to the directors and the people working on it, but as a viewer, I have no clue what they were cooking with that one.
There's that. There's the women who are just in bubbles in like the final showdown. Like the women who
what on earth was that?
Who are being displayed in orbs.
They have been contained.
Yeah, there's like an ending fight scene on a balcony where, like, there are a series of plinths, and on top of the plinths are transparent plastic orbs in which women in scantily clothing are just sort of sitting in them. And I don't know what that was about. At one point, one of them gets shot, and it's like the orb explodes, and that I guess is an interesting visual, but like I don't understand the setup.
I had a feeling like it's probably just them on set. Like, wouldn't it be funny if we got some women and encased them in orbs? Like, it doesn't seem
the
like
orbs
it has
were
any
on
rhyme or
set,
reason
and they
to
were
it.
like, do you fit a person
They
in
just
there?
had a couple of those, like, sitting at the studio.
Let's put some women in there. Like, seriously, that's all it seems like to me in my head.
Yeah.
Maybe there was a narrative reason. Maybe I didn't notice the plot intricacies of Crank 2006. But
Maybe it represents the feeling of containment that he feels within the system that he is trapped within, that he
That's what I
cannot
was gonna
escape.
say, because that ties into the bird metaphors that are constantly like scattered through it. The idea of like him breaking free.
Yeah, he was the woman in the orb, and now he is the bird.
Much like the women in the orb, he was trapped.
But now he has been released like a bird. In this TED Talk, I will...
Crank is actually extremely rich, unlike its opponent, Dune 2, which we mentioned a second ago. I feel like talking about Dune 2 for a second. Just get that out of the way. Get it out of the way.
Spoilers for Dune 2 possibly to follow.
Spoilers for Crank as well. Just in
we
case.
should have mentioned
Just
that.
in case.
we kind of messed that one up.
Oh, well.
So Dune 2, Dune your mom. How do we feel about Dune 2? Gwen, go first. You liked it the
I
most.
liked Dune 2 quite a lot. It is strange to compare these two movies, but I think they both do their thing in very different ways. But yeah, I think I liked Dune 2 a lot. It felt like... If you guys want to talk about that, because we've all seen that, I suppose.
Yeah, we can talk about Dune 2.
Yeah.
It's an interesting one to compare it to, because I wouldn't say they're in the same genre. If we were talking about movies we've all seen recently that fit more into that, I'd say compare it to Monkey Man, but that also doesn't feel right.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing with Dune 2 is that, like, if we want to transition to that, I feel like the reason that I liked it the most is that, like, a lot of these kind of big franchise movies, these big event movies, I sort of came to the party late, in a way. Like, I only got into Star Wars when I was, like, 15. I didn't grow up watching Star Wars. I got into Star Wars when I was a bit older. With Lord of the Rings, I watched that for the first time over the pandemic. Like, I love those movies, but, like, I wasn't there when it was a thing. And pretty much the only one that I can think of being there for is maybe, like, the MCU when it was at its peak with, like, Endgame. And I remember that being, like,
I
a
just
huge...
got there in time for that.
Yeah.
My friend was just randomly like, do you want to watch every single MCU movie on a crusty Discord stream? And
I was
like, sure.
that friend to a lot of people. I watched those movies. I've been nerd pilled my whole life, to for lack of a better word. So, like, I grew up... Star Wars is one I missed, but I was very into Star Trek from a young age. Doctor Who, I've been into that since, like, 7 or 8.
Yeah.
Fucking Pirates of the Caribbean, Jurassic Park, every big franchise I was a big part of, and especially the MCU when that started happening. I remember the day my dad showed me, like, after Iron Man, there was a little bit at the end, and I was like, that's crazy, movies can do that?
Yeah.
It was
like,
wild that movies used to be able to do that and, like, surprise you, and now it's like, hello, I am this person from the comics. I will be in the next film.
Glubshito the Third.
See you
I
in
have a third
2026.
Yeah.
I still don't know who that person in Multiverse of Madness is. Who are you? Don't explain it to me. Don't tell me.
I can explain it if you want.
I'd rather just not know. It would be funnier going into Doctor Strange 3 Poopy McShooty and just not have any clue who that woman is.
I think... But yeah, the point that I was making in terms of that is, like, being there in the cinema watching Dune Part 2 felt like that. It felt like, oh, this is a movie that, like...
It's an event.
This is a movie that if I have kids, I will tell my kids about when I went to see this for the first time. Like, this is a movie that everybody's talking about. This is a movie that, like, this is a big thing that I'm watching, and it feels big. It feels like an epic story in the same level as, like, those movies, and it felt, like, important that I was there for the start of that.
I completely didn't feel that. I felt that with Oppenheimer and Barbie last year. I was like, yeah, this is a huge event. I'm going to tell my kids, not that I will ever have children, I'm going to tell random children in the street, you know, Oppenheimer's really good, you should check it out. You had to be there, but it was really good.
And the parents will be like, what are you doing talking to my child?
What are you doing? Stay away from my child. And then I'm like, if you want a kid-friendly movie, you could maybe try Barbie instead. You know, again, you had to be there, you had to do them both in the same day and just utterly tire yourself out. But maybe you'll understand.
God, I'm glad I didn't do that.
I did it. I was knackered. Dune 2, I didn't feel the same way. I went to it a couple weeks late, in fairness, and I only watched the first movie, like, the day before, because I cannot stand when movies just leave me hanging.
Yeah.
Like, don't blue ball me like that, please.
Yeah.
Across the Spider-Verse, don't blue ball me like that.
Exactly.
Oh, God. The blue balling from Infinity War is probably the worst I've ever had it.
Yeah.
Other than maybe this is gonna, like, because I don't think either of you were there for that, so this may not be a thing you ever had to deal with, but the wait between Pirates of the Caribbean 2 and 3, because they were both filmed at the same time, but there was a year's gap between them releasing. So you knew it was done.
Yeah.
It was just waiting for it to release.
Yeah.
I've only seen the first one, and I saw it on a crusty projector in school. We had a double drama lesson, and they just put that shit on, and I was like, I can't tell what's happening. It's on a crusty projector. What's going on? Who's this guy?
We'll have to do that as, like, another movie night. I can rewatch those, like, any time.
Yeah.
We'll do
I love
Pirates.
those movies. But I definitely get that with Dune. Like, it definitely feels like an event movie. It's one of those rare blockbusters we get nowadays that actually feels like a big blockbuster.
Like it warrants it.
Yeah. Just, I don't know, something in, I don't know if it's in the narrative or just, like, the events of it. Something felt lacking for me compared to the first part.
That's also something that I think I would like to discuss with you, because me and Wren, I think, are both in agreement that Dune Part 2 felt, at least to us, like a big step up from the first Dune.
Yeah, there was a lot more going on. There were less just shots of dildos talking and saying,
Whereas you sort of felt like you preferred the first one.
Yeah, the first one's more... Okay, I'm trying to think of how to word this. The first one feels more sci-fi. It felt like more what I want from my sci-fi. It spends a lot of time establishing this is where we are. This is what Arrakis is. This is where we are in space and space travel. This is the hierarchy by which human systems interact and live.
Yeah.
This is how groups work and interact and live. This is how the ecosystem works around the planet. This is how interstellar travel functions and why we're doing what we're doing. There's a lot more of that.
It's introducing a lot of elements in...
Yeah. It spends a lot of time setting itself up in a very well done way, in a very intricate manner, to where you can see how they would build upon that in the future.
Yeah.
But the second part doesn't deliver on any of that for me, to be honest. It's the best part is when they're on I forget the name of the planet. Is it Getty Prime?
Getty Prime.
That's it? Getty Prime. That is the best part for me, because that is really interesting, seeing how the Harkonnens have their ridiculously pale skin, the crazy foundation, like, all of that is fantastic, but they never get the same depth of treatment that it receives in the first part. Yeah,
because it's like, the first film was like setting everything up, and then the second film is like, okay, all of the pieces are on the chessboard, now we're moving them.
But that's the thing, is a lot of the pieces aren't on the chessboard. They're building up to this big elaborate part in Messiah in the next one.
Yeah.
But that's part of why this movie feels like a missed opportunity. It doesn't feel like a part 1 and a part 2. It feels like I've just watched Two Towers and I'm waiting for Return of the King to come out.
Interesting. Do you think you could see, like, your opinion of it improving upon the release of Messiah?
I don't know, if I'm honest, because this is like, it's always going to have that problem of being billed as a part 1 and a part 2 and it not being that. Like, I'm trying to think of like other examples, but it just doesn't. It's not complete, you know.
Yeah.
I just keep comparing it in my head to the blue balling of the century, which was Across the Spider-Verse. We'll get to you one day.
We'll see how that wraps up when that eventually comes.
I don't necessarily know if I'd call it blue balling, but it's certainly like there's something missing there. There's so much time spent and so little actually happens.
Yeah.
It's like,
it also just kind of ends.
You know he's gonna win in the end. You know where the story is building up to, and you know what's going to happen. But there's no interesting elements around that. The characters he's set up to fight against are built up and interesting, but the world is just not. I felt more interested to learn more about the LA of Crank than I did the Arrakis of Dune Part 2.
Interesting. The thing is, I disagree strongly, because I think that the reason that Dune Part 2 really worked for me as an improvement from the first one is the fact that Paul, as a character, is a lot more complex in terms of, like, how his corruption is sort of shown over the course of the film. I think that in the first film, he doesn't really have a lot of complexity to him as a character. Like, he has a lot of weight on his shoulders as, you know, somebody who has been sort of, I guess, reared to be the Kwisatz Haderach. Aside from that, you know, he doesn't really have many morally complex decisions to make until maybe the end of the movie, in which he, you know, fights against Janus.
I don't disagree with that perspective. He definitely doesn't feel very developed in the first movie, but I think that kind of works to the movie's advantage in that, to a certain extent, he's not necessarily an audience surrogate, but he doesn't know as much about the world as he should, and a lot of things are introduced to us through him, and I find that quite satisfying as an audience member to be introduced to it through that.
If I want to be positive about Dune 1, which I seldom do, I'm not a big fan of it, I like how dangerous the world feels.
Yeah.
Through Paul's perspective. I love how threatening the worm is in every scene it shows up. And then in the second one, it's like, oh, hell yeah, we're surfing on them now. And it's cool, but also I miss when the worms were scary. I really miss when the worms were scary.
I think it needed a third part. I think it needed just that middle ground to get us from him being scared in the desert, meeting them for the first time, and him finally facing off against the Emperor. Like, we needed something in the middle. We needed the whole insurgency arc and him not wanting to go south. That needed its own movie. That needed to be its own split-off movie. I think if they'd have split this into two-hour movies, it'd work a lot better for me.
I think for me, at least, it worked very well just because of, like, they do a lot, because even though the film is like 2.5 hours, like, they still, you know, Dune is a massive book, and they have to figure out how to fit a lot into, you know, the space that they have. And honestly, rewatching it recently, I was surprised by how good the pacing is of the film. It didn't feel like 2.5 hours to rewatch Dune Part 2.
I'm gonna be honest, it did for me. I watched it with my 14-year-old brother, and by the end of it, I was looking at him, and he looks like dead. He looks like a corpse by the time that Paul was going like berserker mode and screaming like, "I am Paul Atreides!" Like, by that point, he was just out. No, he was gone.
That was what interested me, though, because, like, especially on a rewatch, like, you can see because there is an element of I think my first time watching it, if I did have any complaints, it felt like Paul's sudden shift from being, you know, sort of nice guy Paul to, you know, I am an evil colonial dictator Paul, felt very sudden. But I think upon rewatching it, there are elements of that you can see in the first half of the film. There is, like, a conflict within him between, like, he wants to get revenge. He wants to avenge his father. He there is a part of him that sees the Fremen as his key to everything he wants, but there is also another part of him that wants to grow closer to the Fremen, to, befriend them, to be, not necessarily one of them, but to be alongside them. And I think once he sort of drinks the water of life, I think it's less like he suddenly becomes evil and more like those negative aspects of him are heightened. Like, his ego, his need for revenge, his thirst for power takes a hold, and that is... seeing that those like small but dark elements of him be sort of exploded and sort of taking a hold of him, I found that to be very interesting.
They should do Crank, but with Paul Atreides, so he can go back the way again.
What if they gave Jason Statham from the movie Crank the water of life from Dune?
I'm convinced he's already had it.
Honestly, yeah. They should make a Crank anthology series.
They've given me the Iraqian cocktail.
That's why his heart is indestructible.
Just give a different guy the Beijing cocktail in every movie. Just see how they react. I think that would be like a funny little anthology franchise. Give Paul Atreides the Beijing cocktail. See what he does.
Bald Jason Statham in the fucking still suit, just like rocking up on top of the hill, and he's just like, I am Lisan Al Gaib.
Recreate it with fucking Batista.
Yeah.
What's the name of the funny guy in Dune 2? You know, the guy who goes Lisan Al Gaib every single second.
Well, in the film he's called Stilgar, but he's played by Javier Bardem.
Okay, Stilgar. Yeah, Stilgar when Jason Statham mows a car for a mall.
When he's T-posing on a motorbike.
I think it's also... It's weirdly fitting comparing these two movies, because, like, in terms of they are... Well, they're both, I guess you could call them action movies. They are both at complete opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of, like, one is... like very slow in how it sort of presents itself, and it wants to take its time sort of building out a world and fleshing out the characters and sort of discussing the political and the spiritual implications of like everything that's going on, and it really like gives you time to soak it all in, whereas like Crank is just like next thing, and both...
You saying soak it all in has reminded me that was another issue I had with Dune, was the fact of there's a lot of stuff that you soak in that you then later ask, why was this never mentioned or explained? Like the houses, the other houses. Can you tell me the name of another house?
Besides the Harkonnens and the Atreides?
They're just the houses.
Yeah.
No, I suppose not.
Yeah, they should really build those up a bit.
Yeah, they're building towards like this massive interplanetary civil war.
Yeah.
I don't know who any of them are.
Yeah.
I'm weirdly swayed. You're making compelling arguments. Fuck Dune 2. Fuck Dune 2. I'm convinced.
You give a Star Trek fan 5 seconds with any other sci-fi universe, and they're gonna tear it to fucking shreds. Where are the Accords?
No, I just think that like, in terms of like storytelling and in terms of pacing, I think also it's funny how like, because I've watched films that are like, I've put on a film before that would be like, I don't know, 90 minutes, and like I've looked at the runtime and gone like, oh, this will be quick, and then it felt like 3 hours watching it. And I've put on films that are like, 2 hours long, and it felt like a breeze to get through. I think it's interesting to me how both of these films have like drastically different runtimes, and yet both of them I feel like Crank felt like I spent a whole afternoon watching that, and not necessarily in a bad way. Like, it felt like a lot because so much happened, and I think if it was any longer than it actually was, it might have sort of been a bit too much. But like, it felt longer, which is normally a negative thing, but like it felt like that just because it was throwing so much at me.
There's so much to soak in.
Yeah.
Just to interject, I've been looking at our scores for Dune Part 2 and Crank. I wanted to see which one we liked more as a collective. And it is Dune Part 2, but it's by one point.
I would say that
they're gonna kill us. This is our first podcast episode. They're gonna kill us.
I would say that I did prefer Dune Part 2 to Crank.
You definitely did. You're weighing Dune's scoring. 5 stars. Come on.
Yeah.
It's rigged.
But raising the
Dune
average
Part
by
2,
a considerable amount.
double checking, Ivy. 7 out of 10 for Dune Part 2, right?
Sorry, my internet cut out for a moment.
Okay, that's fine. Are you still on a 7 out of 10 for Dune Part 2?
Is that a translation to an actual score from a Letterboxd score?
Yeah, like 3.5.
Yeah, seven's where I'm sat at.
Yeah, I'm at 8. I'm kind of leaning towards 7, but just for the sake of not being biased to Crank, I'm going to keep it at 8 for now. So 7, 8, 10. I'm going to try do maths. That's 25. 25. Then 7, 8, 9. Yeah, 24. So the difference is literally by 1.
Yeah.
Dune 2 barely beats out Crank.
So
Dune 2 sweet.
To anybody listening, Crank is only a little bit worse than Dune Part 2. That is the takeaway that you should have.
Anybody who has listened to this, I want the takeaway to be that you should go and watch Crank. That movie is phenomenal.
Go watch Crank.
I'm honestly surprised, Ren, that you liked Crank as much as you did, because I feel like
I love Crank.
I feel like you are not
Crankheads.
really a big action movie person.
Yeah, I'm not, and I like this one because it doesn't really take itself seriously. I feel like a lot of action in cinema has been very homogenized.
Yeah.
I will see how I feel when I do get to watching Monkey Man. If it's very similar to John Wick, for example, I'm probably not going to like it.
Oh,
much.
I thought you'd already seen it.
No, I haven't seen
it.
it.
I wouldn't say that it is. I think it's interesting looking because at Crank, especially considering the context in which it came out in 2000, that being, the early 2000s, the pre-John Wick era of like
pre-Jason Bourne, right?
Jason Bourne, the Bourne Identity, that came out 2002.
2002. Okay, so we're post Jason Bourne.
Yeah, so we're post Jason Bourne. Are we post Taken? Yeah, Taken was 2008. So
was that 2008? I thought that was 2005.
No, Taken was 2008. So I
love how grainy and high concept Crank is. Like if you go back to John Wick, for example, I haven't seen many action movies.
It's so clean.
Yeah.
He wants revenge. It's clean. He does the action good. Meanwhile, in Crank, he is huffing shit up his nose while running in a hospital gown across the street, and he's like stumbling and stuff. It's messy. It's grainy. Again,
we've got to get you to watch
concept.
more 80s horror, because that's like what not 80s horror, 80s action, because that's like what most of them are. Like Last Action Hero, we're getting you to watch Last Action Hero.
Just more stuff that's weird.
True Lies, True Romance.
I think there is a.
Fuck it, we'll put on Kindergarten Cop. Why not?
I think there was, and I think this film does it well, but there are certainly films out there that do it very badly. I think the 2000s in general kind of gave, I guess, I hate using the term because it feels very, what's the word for when you sort of lump everything into homogenizing towards the genre as a whole? I hate the term shaky cam, but I guess you could apply it to this. I think that in general, a lot of like subpar action movies across the 2000s and early into the 2010s kind of gave that style of filmmaking a very bad rap. And
that's why I mentioned the Bourne Identity, because like that, it did it in a good way, but there were so many copycats that didn't understand how to do it well that kind of ruined action for a while.
Exactly. And so when John Wick came out, it was really refreshing to like a lot of people. It's like, you're filming it in a slow, steady shot. I can actually see everything that's going on. And I think after that, everybody was so sick and tired of fight scenes where the camera's waving about side to side and everything's cutting so sporadically that you can't tell what's going on. And then John Wick was such a breath of fresh air that nobody wanted to go back. And that kind of then became like, oh, so this is what good action is now, and what came before is bad. And I think that now we are maybe kind of reaching a point where maybe that's not as clear because the John Wick standard has kind of, in and of itself, become a movement that, while it's still good, and there's nothing wrong with filming an action movie that way, I think it's become more general knowledge, and so I think we're maybe returning to having a little bit more variance in how we film action. Like, Crank is well filmed, I would say. It's very sporadic and very shaky, but it kind of gets you in that zone.
I feel like 4 John Wick films is as much as they're gonna get away with as well.
Yeah.
Like, I guess from people we've spoken to, and from people I see online as well, I feel like the opinion of the John Wick franchise is kind of wavering after 4. I think 4's the best one.
Same.
Even if it's long as hell. But I can see, like, the kind of John Wick fatigue, or the fact that I think all of those movies, I think it's okay to say they're quite safe.
Yeah.
Like, going forward.
Oh, yeah.
I think
there's
1
no
and 2...
narrative tension, really.
1 and 2 are pretty new to it, so, like, sure, give it the pass. 3 and 4 are better, but they're, like, shining the blade, so to say. Like, it's the same blade, but it's just shinier, looks better, and in 4's case is a bit more narratively interesting.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I can feel, like, the tiredness with it. I feel like we're gonna maybe get a shift in a couple years.
I feel like...
once all of the John Wick copies are out the gate.
I feel like if Monkey Man does well, it could be that shift, because I think, not to spoil Monkey Man, because we might discuss it on another episode, but I feel like that film films its action, while you can still very clearly tell what everything's going on, and there aren't as many sporadic cuts as something like, I don't know, Taken or Bourne Identity. There is a shakiness and a closeness to the way that it's filmed that makes it feel a little bit more like... there was a review that I saw that described it as being tossed around, and I very much like that analogy. And I think I think that way of filming maybe might be coming back into it a bit more. Like, it feels a bit more desperate, a bit more grimy, a bit more gritty. And
that'd be interesting.
I think it's bringing back a little bit of that kind of 2000s flair that you see in Crank, but kind of maybe meeting in the middle. Like, maybe it's like, you know, you take a bit of the clean choreography and the highly stylized action of the John Wick films, but you mix it in with a little bit of that uneasy kind of haphazardness that you got with 2000s action movies.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I'm trying to think, because we've been going for like 50-something minutes now. How do we wrap Crank and Dune up into a neat little bow?
How do we wrap Crank and Dune up? I suppose, like, well, yeah, they're very different movies, but I mean, you know, I love them both.
My takeaway would be you should go and rewatch Pirates of the Caribbean.
Definitely go and watch Crank, though. I mean, if you've made it this far and you haven't watched Crank, we haven't spoiled the ending. We've been sensible. We have not spoiled the ending
of Crank. Although, honestly, I feel like describing Crank verbally is not... Like, I could list the entire plot of Crank beat for beat, and I don't...
You can read the plot synopsis and still be surprised.
I don't think it would adequately explain the level of batshit insane presentation that it has. So, yeah, go watch it if you haven't seen it.
Yeah, go
watch Crank. Go watch Dune Part 2. Go watch Monkey Man.
We'll get to one. Whenever I watch it, we'll get to it.
But yeah.
And I feel like I'm going to be... not like the stinker or anything, but I'm like competing against two people who really, really like Monkey Man, and
I'm not expecting to give it the same score I gave it. That is very personal.
I'm just hoping you'll like it.
Yeah. I'll probably like it. We'll see.
Okay. Well, thank you for listening, anybody who has been, and we'll see you next time.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.